Good afternoon. Welcome to the Center for Studying Disability Policy's 22nd Disability Policy Forum. Today's forum is on SSA's disability programs, new findings on the dynamics of employment and health. My name is Gina Livermore. I'm a senior researcher here at Mathematica. Currently, about 14 million non-elderly disabled adults receive Social Security disability insurance or supplemental security income. Until recently, relatively little has been known about the extent to which SSI and SSDI beneficiaries leave the rolls and remain off benefits, either because they found work or because their medical conditions improved. Today's panelists will present findings from new analyses that highlight the impact of changes in health status and earnings on their participation in the SSA program. So our first speaker today will be Yonatan Ben Shalom. He's a researcher at Mathematica, and he will present findings on the longitudinal employment and use of work incentives by SSI recipients. His study was conducted as part of the Ticket to Work evaluation that Mathematica is conducting for the Social Security Administration. After Yanni, Jeffrey Hemeter from SSA's Office of Program Development and Research will present findings from his study on the long-term program recidivism among SSI and SSDI beneficiaries who had their benefits ceased due to medical improvement. Our third speaker is Shelley Segman, also from SSA's Office of Program Development and Research, and will present findings on the long-term employment outcomes of new SSDI beneficiaries who participated in SSA's Accelerated Benefits Demonstration. Finally, we're pleased to have Craig Thornton, a Mathematica colleague, offer his insight and perspective on these findings and their implications for the future direction of disability support programs. Craig directs Mathematica's Health Services Research Division and has conducted numerous studies on disability, health services, and program evaluation. Craig came to Mathematica right out of grad school and recently celebrated his 35th anniversary. Probably more impressive is he's still got his hair after all these years. There's actually quite a bit of hair on our panel today, for those of you in the web audience. So finally, I want to note that the views expressed by our speakers are only their own and do not represent the opinions of the Social Security Administration or any other federal agency. So a couple of housekeeping things. Our session today has both an in-person and video webinar component, so we ask everyone in the room to please silence their electronic devices so the folks on the phone and web can hear. We're also going to be video recording today's session, so some of you in the audience may be captured in that video, and it will be posted later in the week on our website at www.disabilitypolicyresearch.org. At the conclusion of the presentations, we'll take questions from both the audience and the web folks. For those participating in the webinar, there'll be a Q&A box that's on the right-hand panel, I believe, of your screens, and you can submit your questions through there. And please include your names and affiliations when you submit the questions. All right, I think that's it. I will turn it over now to Yanni, and we'll just go straight through the speakers after.
Okay, so I'll be presenting about the post-award work experiences of new SSI beneficiaries from a longitudinal perspective. As Gina mentioned, Dave and I conducted the study for SSA as part of the Ticket to Work evaluation. The report was just released by SSA. You can find it on their website. We also have a issue brief that accompanies that study, and I believe that's included in your packets. And this study is similar to another study that some of you might be familiar with, a study of DI cohorts, which came out a couple of years ago, which also includes a report and an issue brief, and I think also an article in the Social Security Bulletin. So we set out to answer three basic questions. First of all, how many SSI beneficiaries work post-award, and a bit more specifically, how many of them work and earn enough so that their cash benefits are reduced to zero, and related to that, how many of them use the SSI work incentives along the way. So I just want to give a brief overview of the main SSI work incentives. So we have the monthly SSI benefit. There's a maximum federal benefit, and then that is reduced by countable income. That includes both earned income and unearned income. The earned income exclusion is one way to encourage work, and that kicks in pretty quickly. It excludes the first $65 of earned income and $1 of every additional $2 of earned income. Section 6019A allows beneficiaries to earn above the substantial gainful activity level, which is the threshold used to determine eligibility for benefits in the first place. And Section 6019B allows beneficiaries to maintain their Medicaid eligibility even if their earnings are high enough to reduce their cash benefits to zero. That level is actually a bit higher than SGA. So going back to the earlier questions, if we look for answers in the SSI Annual Statistical Report, we find cross-sectional statistics. And looking here at the report for 2009, the numbers we get are for December 2009, and we find there that 7.1% of SSI beneficiaries ages 18 to 64 had earnings from work in that month, and 1.9% had the benefits suspended under 6019B in that month. So there are a couple of issues with those cross-sectional statistics. First of all, they consider activity only during a short period of time, and because of that, they miss beneficiaries that might have exited for work beforehand. And those who are left in that month are two groups that are less likely to work, those who have been on the rolls for a long time or those who have just joined recently. So given these limitations, we set out to provide a more complete picture following beneficiaries over a longer period of time. And for the most part, we use a methodology that is similar to the DI cohort report that I mentioned. So to begin, we constructed award cohorts. Our main source of data was the ticket research file. We also supplemented that with data from the master earning file and from RSA 911 files, which includes information about enrollment for state vocational rehabilitation agency services. And we assigned people to cohorts based on the first year in which they were awarded SSI benefits as adults. We followed these cohorts through 2007. And in the report, we talk about all the cohorts, and we also provide cross-cohort comparisons. But in this presentation and also in the brief that's in the packet, we focus on the 2001 cohort, which is the earliest cohort for which we have the full set of statistics. And then one of the slides in which I talk about enrollment is for the 1988 cohort, and I'll get back to that then. So these are the work-related milestones that we tracked for our cohorts. Positive countable earnings, which are earnings that are high enough to reduce the cash benefits, at least by some amount. Section 6019B, which I had just described, and again, that means that the earnings are high enough so that they have zero cash benefits. But Section 6019B allows them to maintain their Medicaid eligibility. And related to that, we track suspension or termination for work. That includes 6019B, but also people who had their benefits reduced to zero without using the 6019B provision. And we also looked at two types of employment services that SSA covers. One is employment services by state vocational rehabilitation agencies, and after the implementation of Ticket to Work, also assignment of ticket to an employment network. So before I show results about these milestones, one thing we found out that is very important to consider is that many of these SSI awardees receive DI benefits at some point. And from a longitudinal perspective, this might be before, at the same time, or after they got on SSI. So there are a few reasons why this might happen. They might receive benefits for both programs, eligibility at the same time. They might start on DI first and then lose income sources or assets and become eligible for SSI. Or they might start on SSI when they don't have the work history needed for DI insurance and then accumulate that work history while on SSI. Finally, they might start on SSI and at some point become eligible for disabled adult child benefits or for disabled widow benefits. So this slide shows you how prevalent this is for our SSI cohorts. In this case, again, the 2001 cohort. If you look at the black dashed line, you see that in the year of award, 30% had received DI benefits in at least 1 month. By the end of the period, 6 years later, about 36% had received DI benefits in at least 1 month during the whole period. These are cumulative percentages. And we can also see that for those who were ages 18 to 19 at award, this increase is pretty sharp. They start around 15% in the award year, and by the end of the period, more than 30% had received at least 1 month DI benefit. So let's go back to the SSI markers, and this is for the 2001 cohort, cumulative percentages of those who achieved the milestones by the end of the period, 2007. So out of the 360,000 awarded benefits in 2001, more than 19% had positive countable earnings in at least 1 month. More than 8% had been in 1619B in at least 1 month. But as you can see here, the light blue box shows those who achieved 1619B, but at the same time were receiving DI benefits. So basically, this shows you the extent of the importance of looking at DI benefits, because these, while the benefit for SSI is reduced to 0, they're still getting DI benefits. And a bit larger percent, a somewhat larger percent received, were able to have the benefits suspended or terminated for work. So we were a bit surprised to see that more were able to have the benefits suspended or terminated than were in 1619B. But there are a few possible reasons for that. Some might actually earn above the 1619B threshold. It's a relatively large threshold, but it varies by state. Some might perceive that they don't need to maintain Medicaid eligibility because they will be getting Medicare, and they don't think that they need Medicaid, or they might not be aware of the provision. So those are some of the reasons that we thought that might be the case. We also looked at results separately by age group, 5 different age groups, and there's a lot to take in here on the slide, so I'll just spend a few moments explaining it. So on the left-hand side, we have the percentages, the cumulative percentage who had their benefits suspended or terminated given the number of years after award. And the only difference between the right and the left is on the right, if they were receiving the DI benefits when they were suspended or terminated for work from SSI benefits, we don't count that instance. So in both cases, you can see that the younger beneficiaries are much more likely to achieve this milestone. Looking here at the left-hand side, almost 20% of those ages 18 to 19 had their benefits suspended or terminated for work in at least 1 month over this period. It was about 15% for the second youngest age group, those ages 20 to 39, and considerably lower for the 3 older age groups. Now, if we compare between the two, we can see that the substantial reduction in this percentage, basically meaning that a substantial share of instances in which they received, in which they were suspended or terminated from SSI, were months in which they were on DI. And this shows another dimension of the same story. We basically accumulated all the months in which they were off the rolls following suspension or termination, and the figures are in terms of years per 1,000 beneficiaries. And again, the difference between the left-hand side and the right-hand side is that on the right-hand side, if those were months in which we knew they were receiving DI benefits, we excluded those months. And first of all, you can see there's a large difference between the two. Basically, more than 50% of these months were months in which they were receiving DI benefits. Another interesting finding, again related to the fact that more of the younger groups achieved the status. If you sum up the two youngest groups, you can see that 73% of these years of the roles per 1,000 beneficiaries were contributed by the younger beneficiaries. And to put this in perspective, the younger beneficiaries only constitute 44% of the cohort, so they contribute more than their fair share of the cohort. We also looked at enrollment, as I mentioned, and again, this is for the 1998 cohort, the earliest for which we had this information. About 38,000 beneficiaries enrolled in these services by 2007. That's a bit more than 10%. Again, younger beneficiaries were considerably more likely to enroll for these services. And if we look at these people who enrolled, they achieved the milestones at larger percentages than the cohort overall. Almost 60% had positive countable earnings, and about 32% achieved 1619B. However, of those who enrolled and achieved these milestones, many achieved the milestones before they had ever enrolled. And another related point, that of those who achieved the milestones overall in the cohort, almost 80% did so without ever enrolling for employment services. So to conclude, we found that many SSI awardees also received the I benefits, and also that when we account for that, we see that has a considerable effect on the percentage and duration of the people achieving these milestones. We found that beneficiaries work and leave their roles more often than is suggested by the cross-sectional statistics, and the table at the bottom of the slide compares these statistics. And also, if we exclude these months in which they were receiving DI benefits, there's still a considerable difference. So again, it's not that the numbers are saying different things, but it's just that these numbers provide a more complete picture of what is going on in the long term with these beneficiaries. Another important finding is that the younger beneficiaries have considerably better statistics. And finally, many leave the roles for work without enrolling for employment services. And that was a similar finding was found also in the DI report and previous analysis of Ticket to Work. So what are the policy implications? We think that if the SSI work incentives are used by many more beneficiaries than the cross-sectional statistics suggest, basically we were saying that the more complete picture is important when evaluating any of the programs, because if you just take a snapshot at cross-sectional statistics, it just doesn't give a complete picture. It's important to see what happens over a longer period of time. And the second implication, that Ticket to Work might primarily provide additional support to many who exit for work anyway, because we find this large percentage who achieved the milestones that did not enroll, and because we found that many of those who enrolled had already achieved the milestones before they enrolled. Finally, an important finding, I think, about the interactions between SSI and DI. They need to be considered when initiatives are being rolled out that are targeted to one population. For example, BOND is targeted toward DI, as is, I believe, WISP, that is anticipated soon. So I think our findings suggest that it's important to consider the implications of those programs on the other population, because as we can see, there's a lot of interaction between the two programs.
So I first want to thank Gina and Dave and Mathematica for inviting us to present today, and to reiterate that the views here do not necessarily reflect those of SSA. Also, this work is joint with Shelley Stegman, who will be presenting next. So I'm sure she gets credit. So what I'm going to be discussing is returning to the program after SSA ceases benefits because of medical improvement. And I'd like to start with just a few terminology kind of things. A continuing disability review is called a CDR. Are events that are required by law, and they look for medical improvement in an individual. It's considered program integrity, and ensuring that the people who are receiving SSI or DI are only those who are entitled to the programs. There are basically two parts to a CDR. One is a mailer, which is about 6 questions asking about medical improvement, work activity, health insurance use. And then there's also the full medical review, which is where SSA and the state disability determination services actually collect new information about a person's medical condition. The mailer is much more broadly used, and if you answer the questions in a certain way that indicate medical improvement, you go on to receive a full medical review. Other people don't go through the mailer process at all. They just directly receive the full medical review. SSAs and the Center for Medicare Services actuaries estimate that CDRs save an average of over $9 for every $1 spent, and that does include returning to the program, just to clarify, which is what I'm going to be covering here. But the number of mailers and full medical reviews that are actually processed by SSA is heavily dependent on funding, workload, and staffing. And this figure kind of gives a good idea of how that works. So in 2002, it was the peak year of funding, and SSA received or conducted had about $800,000 dedicated towards CDRs. And I should point out one thing. This is CDRs in general, all CDRs, all medical CDRs, so it includes people who are not covered by the population I'm going to discuss in a little while. And down in 2007 was the low, and there was around a little less than 100,000 full medical reviews, and funding was around 300 million. Sorry, $1 million in 2009 dollars. I think I said that wrong before. So it does track pretty well. And we should point out that there are other CDRs as well. There are what are called work CDRs, which is when an individual returns to work, and SSA has to determine whether or not they continue to meet the income and the earnings requirements and the substantial gainful activity. And that's actually much more prominent than these CDRs, these medical CDRs. And just to put a little bit of context in the population, there are 7 million SSDI workers in December 2011, ages 18 to 64. And as I'll mention later, we look at the years 2003 to 2008, and we have a total of about 33,000 workers who were ceased due to a full medical review. And if you think about that 0.5% that return to work that gets cited a lot, that's about 35,000 to 40,000 people a year who leave SSI due to that for at least some part of the year. So what we're talking about is going to be a smaller population, but it's still a meaningful one, and benefits add up. So savings can be quite large with this process. So the CDR process generally starts at the time of award or the last favorable decision, and there are 3 types of diaries or dates that are set for these medical CDRs. There's the medical improvement expected, and they generally receive a medical CDR, full medical review, as case may be, within 3 years. If SSA or the DDS expect or thinks medical improvement is possible, the MIP, it's 3 years, and if medical improvement is not expected, it's somewhere between 5 to 7 years. It's when they're supposed to receive a CDR. But as I said, it depends on funding and staffing and resources. In order to more efficiently conduct these CDRs, there's a profiling model that looks at individuals' characteristics, how long they've been on the program, their disability, a number of other things, and predicts the likelihood of medical improvement. Individuals are then scored, and people who are low scoring will generally go into the mailer pool. People who are high scoring in that model will generally get directly sent to the full medical review process. And basically, it just helps the CDR process be more efficient and not use up precious administration dollars. So the question I'm going to be looking at is, do SSI recipients and DI beneficiaries who are ceased to the full medical review return to the program? Note that we're not talking about whether or not these are appropriate or generalizing to the full population. This is just looking at people who received one, so it is purely descriptive. The outcome we're looking at is successful applications or awards to SSI or SSDI, and there's basically 6 transitions that can happen. You can go from SSI to DI or SSI back to SSI, and they're all listed there. And these are they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So somebody can go from DI back to DI and also back onto SSI. I said back there, but they were never on SSI to begin with. And I will probably refer to all of it as return, even though it really is only return when you return to the program you came from. But for simplicity, it's a lot easier just to say return for them all. As I said before, we're looking at calendar years, 2003, 2008, 6 years. About a little less than 76,000 final cessations broken up. We're looking at SSDI-only workers, SSI-only adults, and concurrent workers. SSA also conducts age 18 redeterminations for low birth weight babies, SSI children, and a number of other medical CDRs. So we're focusing on these 3 because they're the largest. There's some reductions in the sample for various purposes, but by and large, this is the population of full medical reviews. There's one exception. The profiling model that gets used, there's a group that, a subsample that's used to validate that model. We don't look at them because they were drawn in different ways over time that we couldn't really control for. So if you think about it, what we really want to do is just kind of get a simple ratio of the number of people who return divided by the number of people who were ceased. But we can't really do that because there's this time dimension and these other events that can occur over that time. So they're called competing events. So that an individual can actually return to the program. They could die. They could retire, which for our purposes is age 62. Or nothing could happen to them during our time period, which ends in December 2010. But we don't know that, so they could return later or die after that date or something. So what we do, we use survival analysis techniques and estimate cumulative incidence functions. I'm not going to go over the methodology, but basically what these do is control for all these competing events and over time. And so we can interpret this as an estimate of program return. And it's important to reiterate that this is an estimate and it's not just the straight statistic of the percent that return. Okay, so this is the results. So we estimate that after 8 years, about 20% of SSDI-only workers and concurrent workers who are ceased because of full medical review return to the program. Return to DI. For SSI, people who are ceased who are on SSI only, about 6% actually end up going on to DI after the program. So they either work some more or earn enough quarters of coverage or some other situation change where they were now eligible for DI. If we look at SSI, returning to SSI, it's a little more. The SSI, about 30% of people who received SSI only and were ceased through the full medical review returned to SSI. About 22% of concurrent workers returned to SSI. And interestingly, about 11% of people who are on DI only actually go on to SSI. We're not entirely sure why this would be. Some of it is that they may have spent down their assets or other life changes. But another probable situation is that at the time of the CDR, they just were in non-pay status for SSI. And so they were only technically an SSI-only recipient and maybe should have been counted as concurrent beneficiaries to begin with. Now, if you notice, we have an 8-year follow-up period, but our last cohort really only had 3 years of follow-up time. And the methodology we use does control for that, but we could be missing some aspects of trends over time. And so what we did was we estimated these cumulative incidence functions for each cohort. So each one of these lines represents the year somebody had their full medical review. And this one, the figure 4 here, is the SSDI-only cohorts returning only to SSDI. And by and large, they follow the same trend. There does seem to be somewhat of less return in the more recent cohorts that we don't follow as long. So if you look at the purple line, it kind of only goes out to a little bit before year 3. That's a little bit below the overall trend. And actually each year cohort, it does seem to be getting a little bit less return over time. If we did this for SSI, which we did in figure 5, it's a little more messy. There doesn't seem to be a real pattern, but they all tend to follow the same overall pattern. Let's see. We also estimated how many people returned based by various characteristics of the individual. We looked at that diary type that we mentioned before, and as we would expect, people who SSA thought were not, where medical improvement was not expected, are the most likely to return. We looked at age at initial CDR decision, and at least within their own program, older individuals tend to return back to that program. So an older SSDI only recipient is more likely than a younger SSDI only recipient to return to to DI. But it doesn't seem to hold for cross-program transitions. And so, just to conclude, I think the point of this is that there are a lot of people who are cease from the program but return to the programs. And I think while this is estimated, it is included in the cost savings that the actuaries have, it's something that doesn't get mentioned in the discussions about boosting CDRs and program integrity. And there is a connection to the program that just because you do the full medical review doesn't mean they're going to stay off, and that needs to be remembered. Also, we did see for the SSDI at least that there does seem to be this trend to less return. Some of this could be done, could be the result of better targeting by the model that SSA uses to target full medical reviews, especially when in tight budget situations. It's likely that the people who are being ceased are the most likely not to meet the requirements for the program. So with improved targeting, that savings could go up in the future. On the other hand, it is possible that because there are resource limits, SSA isn't at the point where SSA is doing the optimal number of full medical reviews. So savings could be lower, but you would probably also, if we're not there, then you would increase the number of kind of marginal CDRs, and people who are ceased from the program may come back more, and that would actually reduce savings, reduce savings. So with that, I just want to conclude that we can't, again, say that we can't generalize this to what would happen if SSA were just to mechanically increase the number of CDRs. There's been a large change in the SSI and DI populations over the last few years, especially with the economy. And that targeting, that profiling model has changed over time. So while I think our results do show a fairly consistent pattern across a number of years, it's not clear what would happen if anything changed. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shelley Stegman, and I'm going to talk about the impact of supplemental rehabilitative services on the labor market activity of SSDI beneficiaries. And I want to mention that this is work that I've been doing with Bob Weathers once again reiterate that these are our views and not necessarily those of SSA. Okay, so I want to motivate this discussion by first beginning at the application process. So many people in this room know that individuals who apply for SSDI often go through a long and strenuous process to obtain benefits, and sometimes this is a deterrent for them to return to work because they're afraid that they may lose those benefits if their work attempts are not successful. And so we think that if we can give them the right supports and help them maintain some attachment to the labor force for those who are able to, then we can prevent them from a lifetime of reliance on SSDI when they maybe do not need that in the future. And so as always, we want more evidence to see how we can best address these issues and what supports are most helpful for these beneficiaries. So one project that we've collected data on that has some evidence that might help us with this is the Accelerated Benefits Demonstration Project, and this was designed to test the impact of providing health insurance and additional services to newly entitled SSDI beneficiaries who did not have health insurance. And we were looking for impacts on the use of health care, health outcomes, employment, and earnings. So in this presentation, we're going to focus on the last two bullets, the employment outcomes and the earnings outcomes from this project. This project, the contract was awarded to MDRC in 2006, and Mathematica served as a subcontractor. Chuck Michaelopoulos and Dave Wittenberg specifically were the leaders for the team and led the evaluation of this project within the first year, and then we're following up for a longer time frame on these participants. Okay. So the target population for this demonstration, we wanted to find beneficiaries who we thought would be most likely to return to work. So we restricted it to individuals who were between 18 and 54, so we excluded older individuals who may be closer to retirement. We wanted them to have at least 18 months until Medicare eligibility. So once they came onto the rolls, there's a 24-month waiting period before they're eligible for Medicare, and this is when we wanted to provide them services. So we wanted to make sure we had an adequate time frame for them to receive the services and actually have an impact. They could not have a representative payee, so they needed to be able to manage their own benefits. They needed to be in one of our demonstration sites. And then also they needed to be allowed at the initial level of adjudication, and this was to ensure that they would have enough time also for us to provide the services to them before they were eligible for Medicare. So this in turn meant that these were individuals whose disability determinations were fairly straightforward and easy. They didn't have to appeal to a higher level because it was a little bit more of a marginal case. So that's an important point to remember. And then also they could not have health insurance at the time of screening, and so that was self-reported. So our contractor recruited participants from October 2007 to January 2009, and we actually only follow up participants in this paper throughout the first two phases. In the third phase of the project, the costs were a little bit higher than projected. So participants were only randomized to 2 out of the 3 of the groups in the last phase. So we exclude those individuals for our follow-up analysis to make sure we have consistent randomization across the 3 groups. So as I said, they were randomized to 3 different groups. Our first group was our AB Plus group. So this group received a health benefits package, and they also received additional services that were delivered through the telephone. The second group was our AB group. They received the same health benefits package but did not receive the additional services. And then the third group was the control group. The control group did not receive the health benefits package and they did not receive any services, but they could on their own have obtained health insurance through other means. So the health benefits plan was pretty comprehensive. There was a limit of $100,000 per beneficiary, so they could not exceed costs above that point. And then the telephonic services that we delivered included a medical case management, and this is where nurses assisted beneficiaries in managing the healthcare system, making sure they knew who they needed to contact to get the appropriate health care to treat their conditions. And then it also included a PGAP program, Progressive Goal Attainment Program, and this was designed to reduce negative perceptions of their disability and help them improve functioning through encouraging them to set their own rehabilitation goals, and kind of incrementally build up to a schedule so that they could be more in line with requirements that would be needed if they wanted to return to work. And then finally, they were also offered employment and benefits counseling. So this is where a counselor worked with them to let them know how their benefits, how working would affect their benefits, and then also if they were interested in work, they looked at their work history and their interests to help them find out where the best resources would be to find employment. Okay, so what we were interested in this project was looking for whether these additional services led to whether they were actually received by our treatment groups, whether it increased employment for these participants, and also whether we saw higher levels of earnings among those who received these services. The data for this project, we used baseline and survey data collected at 12 months after randomization. We also used SSA administrative data from the master beneficiary record, and earnings data came from the summary earnings record within SSA. And all of our outcomes are measured from the date of random assignment. So that's our follow-up period. So here's just a small table of descriptive statistics. These are just a few of the ones I wanted to pull for this. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but just wanted to point out a few facts. That most of the individuals in this project were 50 and over, age 50 and over. Most of them fell in the mental disorders category, had a musculoskeletal impairment, or other body system. And then a majority of them had either a high school education or less. And most of them had earnings that were less than $30,000 in the 3 years prior to random assignment. So this is a 3-year average of their earnings prior to when they were randomly assigned, which for these individuals was close to the time when they were awarded benefits. So these are the earnings prior to them receiving benefits. And I should mention the sample sizes. The AB Plus group had 611 people in it, AB had 305, and the control group had 615. And once again, this is just a subset of the sample in the whole demonstration project. Okay, so the 12-month survey results. So the first 3 columns just show the percentages for each group. The last 3 columns show the differences between the groups pairwise. So the first thing I want to point out is that the AB Plus group was more likely to look for work for random assignment, receive rehabilitation or employment services, which could include ticket to work services, vocational rehabilitation services, or others. They were more likely to contact someone about benefits and also get help in understanding how working would affect their benefits. They were more likely than both of the other groups. So you see the stars showing the significance level in the 4th and 6th columns. So this is evidence for us that it was the additional services that were provided to the AB Plus members that actually led to these impacts, and not just the health benefits package that was offered to the AB and the AB Plus group. Because there were no statistically significant differences between the AB and the control group. That's what I want to point out there. And then we also looked at employment after random assignment. So this is measured by positive earnings. So this is the percent for each group. And these are calendar years after random assignment, so the first calendar year after second and third. And so you don't see any statistically significant differences in the first year. In the second year, we see that the AB Plus group had about 17% who had positive earnings, and the AB group had about 11%, and the control group with about 12%. So this shows us our 5.6 percentage point difference between these groups in the second year after random assignment. But then in the third year, these differences subside. And so we had kind of expected them to continue, and so we had a few thoughts as to why that might not be the case. In the third year, none of the participants were receiving any of the services. In the second year, some of them were still receiving them, and some of them weren't, depending on when they were randomized, if it was in 2007 or 2008, and how much time they had until their Medicare eligibility date. So that's one thought as to why the differences may have subsided and the levels of employment have evened out in the third year. So then we also looked at mean annual earnings after random assignments. This is for all participants. So this includes participants who had no earnings in the years after random assignment. So in the first 2 years, we find significant differences, with the AB Plus earning about $736 more per year than the AB group. It's a similar but slightly smaller increase compared to the control group. And then in the second year, we see even larger differences, with the AB Plus group earning about $1,000 more. And then once again, the differences seem to mellow out in the third year. And so another thought that we've had is that maybe participants in the AB Plus group with the services were encouraged to go back to work faster, and the control group and the AB group may have held tight without having those additional services to encourage them. But then by the third year, the AB Plus members may have backed off on their employment to make sure that they could continue receiving benefits and weren't ceased from the roles. So that may be one of the reasons why they tend to level out by year 3. And then this graph is similar to the last one, but it only includes individuals with positive earnings. It's conditional on earnings being greater than 0. And here we see about a $4,000 difference between the AB Plus group and the AB group. Difference is about the same for the control group. And here we also see no statistically significant differences in the second and third year. So we think it may have been the services that encouraged them to get back to work faster, but then maybe they decided not to continue that trend to make sure that they could maintain their benefits. And then lastly, we ran Logit regression to look at what characteristics made beneficiaries more likely to be employed 2 years after random assignment, and also have earnings that were higher than SGA, substantial gainful activity level, 2 years after random assignment. So we found that those with some college education or a bachelor's degree were more likely to be employed 2 years after random assignment. And those who were less likely to be employed included the older individuals who were age 50 or over, and then also those with a neoplasm or cancer or a neurological impairment. And then those who were more likely to have earnings that were greater than SGA 2 years after random assignment included those who had prior random assignment earnings that were higher, so those with pre-random assignment earnings greater than $20,000. That's that 3 years before they were assigned and about when they received awards. And then once again, those who were age 50 and over were less likely to have those higher level of earnings. And all of these results were statistically significant at the 10% level or lower. So finally, we would like to continue tracking AB participants over a longer follow-up period. We only have about a few years right now, but we want to see if some of these higher levels of employment lead to some of these participants actually leaving the roles in the future. But this project and this data provides some evidence that these services may be helping beneficiaries at least return to work faster, which could be important to make sure that they are not disconnected from the labor force for too long. And then finally, there's many proposals out there for work-focused programs that actually reach out to individuals before they apply to SSDI to help them maintain that attachment, which may have even stronger outcomes so they do not have to actually go through that whole application process, which could be a disincentive for them to try to return to work. So in the future, the other thing I want to mention is that individuals in the control group, I said, were able to obtain insurance through other means. So some of them actually did within the first year. About 40% of them obtained health insurance at some point within the first year. So we may have seen bigger impacts if we actually had a control group that didn't have any insurance throughout the 18 months that they received, 18 to 24 months that they received services. Thank you.
While Craig's making his way up, I just want to remind the folks on the webinar to submit their questions because we'll be doing the Q&A session right after he speaks.
All right. Well, thanks, Yanni, Jeff, and Shelley for some really thoughtful and thought-provoking papers. Each one of them has some important implications, but I'd actually like to talk about some broader context to how to think about what these papers say and what they imply for some upcoming policy decisions that we're going to see a lot about in the next few years. But the first thing I want to do is a bit of context. is to put this slide up. Yanni mentioned there was an earlier study looking at disability insurance beneficiaries. And so, while the metrics on these two slides are slightly different, the pattern is the same across both of them. And that is that you see a reasonably sized minority return to work. Fairly number, sometimes as many as 19% work at some level. But then as you get to the last boxes, you can see that it's 9, almost 10% for the SSI folks, and almost 4% for the DI folks actually work enough to have their benefits suspended or terminated. So these are really meaningful levels of work. Now, as Jeff said, they may come back later on, but right now we're seeing some work effort. And this is the important thing. Work is a lot higher than the mythical 0.5%. When you talk to people about employment among disability insurance SSI beneficiaries, it's always like, well, it's only 0.5% leave cash benefits for work every year. And these results really say, no, it's actually more people are attempting work. Work is not so rare. What may be rare is its total success in getting back and increasing their income levels, but work itself isn't so rare. Now, I might also ask, and maybe Yanni and Dave Stapleton have looked at this stuff, can offer a few more ideas. Why is return to work so much higher among the SSI group than among the DI group? And I suspect a lot of it is because of the concurrent beneficiaries, as Yanni mentioned. There's a lot of interaction between the programs. Some of it may be that the 1619 provisions that allow a lot higher earnings on the SSI program may let people go back to work more frequently. And many people in SSI may, in fact, those who are working, actually get fairly small benefits. So going back to work, you may not be giving up very much in terms of SSI cash benefits. And so it may not be that much of a disincentive. But I'm sure you guys look at it more. I know the paper talked about this to some extent. I want to jump back. Whoops, not another slide. Just to think about what these results have to say about the definition of disability that kind of underlies a lot of thinking about the Social Security, disability insurance, and SSI programs. And, if you think about it, what Yanni says is that a fair number of people, Yanni and Stapleton, that maybe it's as many as 20% of people who are, basically they prove that they cannot engage in substantial gainful activity because of a disability. So they really proved this, but yet 20% go back to work at some point. What Jeff shows us is that the people who, they proved they couldn't go back to work, but now maybe you found some medical improvement. But if you wait long enough, maybe 20% of those people coming back on the rolls. And in Shelley's paper, the accelerated benefits demonstration looks at a set of volunteers. And one thing you always notice when you look at demonstrations, particularly those with random assignment, is that don't bet against volunteers. The people out of the whole population that come forward to enroll in a work program are not a random sample. These people often wanted to work, wanted to make a change in their life. And in fact, we see 12% employment rates even among the controls 3 years after the random assignment. So what we're seeing here is that, the inability to work is not some sort of immutable characteristic of people who are getting disability benefits. In fact, there's a lot of dynamic stuff going on here. And so, I was thinking about this, and you guys are probably all familiar with the story, but, early on in the 50s, when the disability insurance program was first being created, there was a big debate between two people, characterized by these two people. One was Robert Altmaier, who thought that the disability insurance program was for people who are basically taking early retirement. They were not going to work anymore. They're going to get disability benefits. That was it. Pretty simple on-off kind of termination. Mary Switzer, on the other hand, thought that rehabilitation was much more important, and that the idea was to take people who are having, were unable to work right now and see can you help them get back into the labor force. Now, interestingly, if you just go down the street from here, the rehabilitation services is in the Mary Switzer building, and the central headquarters for this, not yet. It will be, and when the rehab's all done. And then the headquarters for Social Security is in the Robert Altmaier building. So when you look at the Social Security program, you can understand, well, which guy took prominence. So, I think as we look forward and we look at the results from these presentations, is maybe we need to bring these two together, which I guess means we're going to have a new headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland, partway between Woodlawn and D.C. But, it's to think a little bit about, that one size does not fit all. That I think the idea is kind of bring these ideas together to think of a more dynamic program. And this is particularly important because, as again you're probably all familiar with, in 2016, the Disability Insurance Trust Fund is projected to be exhausted. There are all sorts of short-term fixes that can be made to maybe help deal with that problem. But fundamentally, this is causing us to think, well, are these disciplinary programs really serving people, really helping, in the way they could, are really getting the best? And are we thinking about disability in the right way? Are we really thinking about it in this dynamic nature? And so I thought I'd leave with a couple of ideas about that in particular, and in particular we have this Altmaier-Switzer approach as we go forward. The first is, if we're not going to have one size fits all, we're going to need to have more customized tailoring. The tailor's going to have to think about that the variation isn't just among people. What all these papers show is that the variation is also over time. And so you have to be thinking about something that it's a much more fluid definition than we've used in the past. The second thing, and this comes a little bit from these results, but mostly from the results, if you look actually what's going on in the programs that are trying to serve people with serious impairments, disabilities, is that it's generally a bad idea to decide to construct a single program that's going to serve people in a uniform way. Don't ask people to kind of work to conform to the needs of a specific program. No, have the programs designed to meet and conform to individuals, what's in their environment, their characters, their family supports, all things they have. This customization is going to be really important. So we keep coming back to this tailoring example. The third thing, and this is again a little bit in the papers we heard today, is that you have to think about the risks and incentives that are inherent in the program. It's not just getting out some services to people. You have to think about, well, what, how are they looking in their life? What are the incentives they have to do something different? This comes back a little bit to the volunteers who might have been looking for a change, looking to do something different. You think about the incentives that beneficiaries face. So, okay, if they go back to work, they're going to lose health insurance. Well, we're taking care of a lot of that. And presumably, when the Affordable Care Act is completely rolled out, that may be even more assurance that folks will feel they have coverage. But they also worry about how the rent's going to be paid, what's going to happen, and the system is not that clear. These are really complicated programs to administer, and it's very complicated for the beneficiaries to go through them. But I think you also have to think about the incentives that face the providers. And a couple people talk about ticket to work, and we can come back in the question period if people want to talk about, do providers really have an incentive to deliver what what these people might really need and to customize it to help people really take advantage. And do providers have an incentive to intervene at the right time? Simplicity is likely to be important going forward. I think it's also important to jump in quickly. I think the people that Gianni and Dave identify in the papers who are attempting to work, if you can intervene then, take advantage of the initiative the beneficiaries have and jump on that rather than waiting for some other time when, the clock rolls around. Okay, now it's time for your intervention. That may not be, in fact, probably won't be the right time to intervene. And lastly, I want to add just an observation, is if we're going to try to jump and put in some new interventions, try to really change any of this stuff, and this is a message that probably most people on Capitol will not want to hear, but it's very, very hard, probably impossible to do that on the cheap. Occasionally you can, but you're talking about a program that's now on the DI case, over 50 years old. There's all sorts of, expectations, understandings. Many of them are not correct, but there's lots out there. People are making decisions based on imperfect information. If you want to change all that, you want to change their habits, you want to draw new providers into a system, this is not going to happen because, you put some really complicated program out there that people partly understand and it might take, years for them to see returns from. My favorite example in this case is when Medicare decided they were going to rely on the public sector and introduced managed care early on. They brought managed care in big time. It wasn't some little dinky thing. In fact, they thought managed care was going to take over the Medicare program. Well, why? Lots of reasons, but maybe one particular reason was the way they set up their risk adjustment system, the way they adjusted payments to adjust for who actually enrolled in the program was flawed. And flawed in a way that if you went into managed care and Medicare, you could make a lot of money. It was pretty clear how you could make a lot of money, and that really got a response from the marketplace. If you look at ticket to work, well, okay, maybe if you really tried and you squinted and held your breath for a really long time, you could make money on ticket to work, but it was not going to be clear that you could do that. And so you get responses. You may need to put something really forceful in place. And just to conclude with one thing I thought was actually really nice and remarkable about the three papers, is that they all drew on longitudinal information. And this information, this long-term perspective, taking the patience and the time to link data over multiple calendar years, really gives you a different perspective, gives you a more understanding about what's going on in the behavior of these individuals. And that data, the use of that, is really an important methodological advance. So I want to thank all the authors, both for their presentations today and for helping advance the use of this kind of really important data source. Gina.
Okay, we'll open it up to Q&A. We have a roving mic, and for folks here, if you could state your name and affiliation with your question and try to keep it to one question, and we'll alternate between the in-house and webinar group.
Hi, Lisa Ekman with Health and Disability Advocates. First, I'd like to say thank you so much for doing some longitudinal work. I think one of the things that gets lost in discussion is what happens to people over time. But I guess my question for you, one of the things I didn't see in the results, and I haven't read the papers, is how did you account for changes in health status? So, for example, when you were providing services, you saw a big bump in the first year, and then maybe it equaled out. How do you account, like, declines in health, which are very typical for people who have disabilities, that they go up and down? I didn't see any survey results around asking, well, how are you feeling? How is your disability? And how that might affect, over time, people's ability to work.
So, actually, we focused on, thank you. So we actually focused on those, how their health may have changed over time in another paper, but we keep these two separate. But I think it is meaningful to incorporate them both into the same analysis. So I think that's a good point.
You were directing the study or the question to Shelley, right? Because the other two guys, I don't think, other than what's implicit in medical improvement, I even looked at that. All right, is there anyone on the web?
This question is for Yoni, and it comes from Patricia Owens. She asks, do you have any information on the characteristics of persons who leave the roles without employment services?
We did not look at that in the study. I don't know if anybody of the other Mathematica researchers in the room has insight on that. I'm looking at you, Gina.
I know, I'm thinking. Sorry. I'm thinking we did at one point, you know, Yanni's paper was limited by administrative data, which only has so many characteristics, and he showed you some of them, you know, the age, and I think that was the only one you showed. We have looked at the likelihood of leaving the roles with survey data, National Beneficiary Survey, but it was a long time ago, and I'm afraid I cannot remember, other than age being important. I'm sort of remembering that, well, certainly the benefit program you were on was also important, and Craig sort of alluded to that. Oddly, SSI folks earn more and tend to spend, at least in the point in time, be off quickly. And I think it was another characteristic was how many benefits you have in other programs you're receiving, but that can be endogenous with the fact that you're working and then you no longer qualify or relying on non-SSA benefits. But I'm sorry, my memory's not better on that. But it is in some Mathematica report on the website.
I just wanted to add and also respond to Craig. One of the main reasons that there's more people who work on SSI is that they're on average younger. And of course, you could do analysis where you account for that, but that's one of the reasons.
Sorry, go ahead, David. Yeah, go ahead, David.
Herman gets to pick
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
This is Dave Stapleton, partly responding to Craig's question. I actually think the statistics are a little bit misleading there. If you look at suspense, it's clearly the case that more SSI recipients have their benefits suspended because of work. But if you look at employment measured by earnings, I don't think it's the case that they're more likely to have earnings or have higher earnings either. So it's partly the measures that were being presented here and the differences in the work incentives in the two programs.
Joanne Schneider, George Washington University. I've got a couple quick point of information questions, which is going to wrap into a comment and then a question. The point of information questions, and by the way, I wanted to thank you for your comments. They were wonderful. And I only made it here for the last paper, so if others are addressing this, please do. when I look at this table, first point of information question, I see something that says mental disorders, and I'm wondering if that includes the IDD population and people with mental health population, or you disaggregate that, because you're going to have very different things with those two different populations. The second point of information question I had is, this isn't just new entrants, right? It's everybody? Yeah? It's not just new entrants, it's everybody, right? Yeah. It's just, really? Wow. Okay. Your study. The AB log is just new entrants. Okay. That's fascinating.
So the people on the web can hear and put them closer to you?
Yeah. Okay. So, first comment, I think this is wonderful stuff, but as I looked at it, two things sort of hit me. First is you're stopping at 54, and those of us over 50 who have disabilities and would love to continue working are a little bit, I keep hearing from about 25 different sources, essentially what's happening is you've got a population that worked and worked and worked until the recession, then they were thrown off of work, and they can't get back in because of discrimination for age and disability combined, so they're applying for SSDI and SSI. And yeah, so I would hope that these studies would go up to 60, 62, and that somebody would think policy-wise about that lost population and what's happening with them. That said, the other two things I noted here is that, you know, if you're not disaggregating the IDD population, which has one set of supports and one set of needs, and the mental health population, which is another, you know, you're getting two very different things, mixing apples and oranges. But what I'd love to see here, and this is sort of a gee, it would be nice if you did future research, or have you done this and it's just not reported here, is really matching the nature of the disability to the nature of the prior skills, and matching that to, one, the kind of work supports they're getting, not just your AB program, which sounds wonderful, but are they getting into doors? Are they getting to fill? Do they have IDD support? You know, what is it that's helping them get a job? And two, if you're, for example, a carpenter and you fall off a ladder and you can no longer work, your transferable skills with a high school diploma are, shall we say, low, right? If you are a person with a college degree and you now have MS, your transferable skills are different. So how do transferable skills match to getting a job again? I think I'll stop there.
Okay, well, I'll just address two of the points that you'd first brought up. The mental disorders category is all aggregated, but we can disaggregate it. So we can do that in the future. And then the up to 54, that was just to try to find a population so that we could get the biggest impact, so we could find like an upper bound on what we were looking at for this to see if anyone would return to work. So that, I think that's why it was restricted before my time that it was decided, but that's the answer to that point.
Well, Shelley, you should probably also note your sample sizes allow you to disaggregate at the level that she's talking about. In the multivariate stuff, you can throw in the variables that you can't compare people with mental retardation and so forth, because you got 600 people, you know, in your control group and 900 in the other. So.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we did have the 62 to 64 group in our analysis of SSI beneficiaries, and we can just see that the results, you know, fall by age. But we have the statistics for that group.
Maybe we should do one on the web. I'm sorry, you are next because you got ousted by Dave.
This question is for all of our panelists. Does SSA have any programs to encourage employers to hire people with significant disabilities?
Wait, can you repeat that?
Does SSA have any programs to encourage employers to hire people with significant disabilities?
Looking at the SSA people.
I don't think so, but I think no.
No.
What's that?
Yeah,
Why don't you, since you brought it up? Now he's taking the mic from you once again. You've got to give it right back to the woman next to you.
The Ticket to Work program was, when it was introduced, people expected that employers would actually use it, either become employment networks themselves and take advantage of the payments that SSA would make to them because they hired people, or to use it through other employment networks to have them do that. So some of that has gone on, but it's been much more limited than I think was expected.
Question. Just following up kind of on the health angle a little bit.
Sorry, what's your name?
Margaret Campbell Nider, National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research. And it's a wonderful forum. I love coming over here when I can get a chance to get out of the office. That's great. So just following up on the health angle, and what Craig said, your kind of last line, we need to think about new interventions. And I wondered if anybody is talking, I don't think there's research yet, but talking about what might be included in those new interventions. And my thought is, in addition to employment services, or maybe equally as critical, are some really health promotion types of services that really address the return to work issues for people with long-term disabilities, where they have are encountering all sorts of secondary health conditions on top of that. And that really, so is anybody talking about that? Is that just so pie in the sky that it has no chance of getting a hearing? Or are there people seriously trying to look at what beyond, medical case management really doesn't touch that, of course. So just a wide open question.
I'm sure there's people talking about it. The whole point of trying to customizing the services, I don't think we're doing any research right now that's looking exactly at what you're talking about. But the point of it is, that people who come into these programs need a variety of services, and employment services by themselves are unlikely to be enough, and that's kind of the point you're making. So I think that's been well established. So then the question is, how do you find a way to reasonably put together a package of services that you can afford to deliver on the scales we're talking about here with this program? We're talking about 10 million plus people. Even if you just focus on the people who look like they actually have an effort to work, it's still millions. And, so how are you going to, afford this kind of stuff, figure the more comprehensive it gets. So I think that as healthcare reform rolls out, you need to be thinking about, well, what's included in the benefit packages? A lot of times, someone can work, but they might need help with, just getting on with people. It depends on the nature of your disability. Mobility, supports, transportation is often a big issue. So how do you find a gap-filling kind of resources? We've seen this also in something like the cash and counseling program. So you come at this, there's programs that coming at it from different angles. That was one for people who were getting personal care services at home. But it's an interesting idea, which is that you look at the services people are entitled to. You said, well, okay, we'll give you money instead of the services. You pick other people to deliver the service, or you pick equipment or other things you think might meet the need. And the nice part is there's a counseling to kind of help people make those decisions. And that's a pretty powerful intervention. People made good decisions. We didn't find, adverse outcomes increasing when people took over from the programs. And we found satisfaction much, much higher. That wasn't so much employment focused, but there's no reason those kind of ideas couldn't be extended to this. So there are lots of ideas. I think, there were, 6 hearings this summer on the DI program, in Congress, and we're going to see a lot of talking about it. So it's just partly getting these ideas floated and thinking about how to draw on all these strains of research to kind of provide good information going forward.
Okay.
Tom Fraker with Mathematica. This is a question for Jeff. Jeff, I was surprised at the amount of, I guess you'd call it recidivism among those who leave the rolls. Just looking at your figure 2 among DI beneficiaries who leave the rolls, 20% are back on DI after 8 years, and another 10% are on SSI at the end of 8 years. So that's a 30%.
They could be on both.
Okay.
Sorry, they could be on both.
All right, so it's between a 20 and 30% recidivism rate. So clearly folks who leave the rolls are an at-risk group. They're highly at risk of going on the rolls again. And that suggests the need for services or some sort of outreach for this group. Are any services available to those folks, and what are your thoughts about the need for such services?
Just that first point. I think the services that are available to anybody are available to them is the general rule. I don't think there's any specific programs for former beneficiaries or former recipients. As for the need for them, 20 to 30% return to the program. So I'll leave that to the policymakers to decide whether or not that's evidence of need.
It suggests an intervention point. Someone has to make a calculation of what's the trade-off. You're not going to get $9 return for every dollar on those services. If that's the standard, you're not going to do it. But it's just like the people who are on the rolls and start to work, and then the work effort ends. Well, could you help stabilize it? Could you help build on that effort, that initiative? Just like these people go off, if they're determined to be medically improved and they happen to be working, can you help them, connect the services and prolong that?
Do we have a better idea exactly who these? Some better description of this population that's returning?
So we're actually working on the paper that goes along with this presentation is currently being vetted by SSA for release, and in there we do have a lot more detail on the characteristics of who's returning. We separated out by diagnostic group. I presented age and diary type, but we know a lot more. Gender, age, whether or not they've been on the program for a long time. Generally, whatever we can find in the administrative record, we can get these kind of estimates for. We'll go with 8 months from now, but we'll see.
Jeff, and following up on that one question, is there a lot of state-to-state variation in return rates?
We didn't look at that, actually, but there might be.
One would expect different labor markets and different things might be.
So in our models, we do control for the different states that they're in, but kind of just like a fixed effect that you can kind of just throw away the estimate of, but we can look more carefully at that.
Okay, take a question up here, and then one to the web, and then I saw one in the back.
I'm Dr. Jennifer Christian from Webbility Corporation, and I'm familiar with the PGAP program. And actually, one way to call it or refer to it is as a biopsychosocial intervention, part of whose purpose is to shift the way the person sees their own situation. And those who know psychology, it's actually using some cognitive behavioral techniques to do that. That's a very proactive intervention in comparison to many of the other ones I've heard you talking about. And are you tracking the biopsychosocial interventions they've been doing in the UK with personal advisors and biopsychosocial intervention to get people to actually choose employment instead of reactively supporting people who have chosen employment, is to actually shift and create hope where people have already got despair?
So, no, we're not following those. These individuals were randomly assigned to the group, so they weren't necessarily volunteers who asked to receive the services. So I wouldn't say that those are the ones who were necessarily already looking for work. They may have already made up their mind that they wanted to work and then engaged in the PGAP services, and those who didn't want to just said, I don't want help with that. I don't want to receive the services. But it would be interesting to follow up on that and incorporate it into that work to see and what happens longer term if there are impacts. But the PGAP was only offered for, the Medicare waiting period. So I'm not sure if we offered it for a longer period of time, if we would have seen bigger impacts or not.
But was there a specific benefit change that happened at 2 years? You said that there might have been things that influenced people to come back off work because it looks so much worse in the third year. Were there, in fact, changes to their benefit package at that third year?
So, no, there were not. But so they received the AB healthcare benefits up until their Medicare eligibility, and that's the only change in the benefits, is they received our benefits package, the health benefits that we gave them in the project, and then the standard Medicare is what they received. But that was in the second year that it changed.
But doesn't what that imply is if I'm working at a job that doesn't offer me health benefits and I'm coming into my third year, I'm going to lose those benefits and I won't have Medicare, so I guess I'll go back on Social Security?
Just to make sure I understand you correctly, are you talking about people who have left the role?
You said a lot of them were working in that second year. Was the way that they were working going to jeopardize their eligibility for Medicare the next year?
It could have. It could have.
So
We followed
that's
up.
what I'm wondering, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I think this is an important point. Isn't it true that the PGAP services also ended when the
Right.
when the
They
Medicare?
ended as soon as they were eligible for Medicare. Mm-hmm.
Okay, this question is also for Shelley and comes from Ray Cibula of Cornell University. He asks, what percentage of those who retain DI after 3 years or parking had benefit levels higher than the SGA level?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Sure. What percentage of those who retain DI after 3 years had benefit levels higher than the SGA level?
So I guess in one of the graphs it shows the percent, or it might not be in this presentation actually.
Yeah, you talked about the likelihood of getting, but then what was the likelihood?
Yeah, so it's actually in our paper. I don't remember the percentages offhand, but it was certainly small, the percentage who worked over SGA after that time. There was a hand back there earlier.
Yes, my name is Elaine Alfano with the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law. And I was wondering if you did any, after someone left work, any post-interviews or surveys to find out why they left and, maybe what their level of unmet need was or what the cause of their leaving was. Thanks.
We didn't do any interviews.
No, but SSA is in the process of designing a survey right now that, it's part of their National Beneficiary Survey. They're going to oversample a group of folks who left benefits, and so they'll have a lot of information about their health and well-being and income sources, and then they're going to have a special question model that specifically focuses on how they got to that point, and there'll be a group that they'll also interview that are going to be, they left and came back on, and it'll focus on what, why did their work attempts failure, what made them come back on. So I don't think there's any kind of that information out there that exists on a large scale right now, but it will after they do the survey in 2014. Is there any more on the web?
Let's see. This question is for Jeff. They ask, what percentage of those returning to the roles did so via EXR provisions rather than new applications?
My understanding right now is that EXR is for a work CDR, and so the answer should be 0. But I do need to look a little bit more closely at the data to see how much, what that problem is. I know overall, I think our colleague Cindy Duzan mentioned to us that about 33% of people come back through EXR who have a work CDR termination, but I don't know about it.
Do you want to mention what EXR is for people?
So, yeah, expedited reinstatement. So after a DI beneficiary returns to work, and their benefits are suspended for an extended period of eligibility, they have 36 months, and then after that, there's a 5-year expedited reinstatement period where they can come back onto the rolls a little bit quicker through an abbreviated process.
Another one for Dave Stapleton.
Well, nobody else put their hand up, so I was careful. So, Jeff, isn't it the case if somebody benefits are terminated because of medical improvement, they also lose their Medicare immediately? For those that didn't hear, the answer was yes. So I guess I was thinking that might be one reason that people end up coming back on the rolls, because they don't have insurance coverage anymore and don't need the medical care that they need to maintain their health.
I should point out a companion paper that we're actually working on is looking at earnings, and given how Medicare or medical coverage or medical insurance is tied to the labor market, we may be able to look a little bit at that. But obviously we don't capture medical insurance status in SSA data, so we wouldn't be able to get it directly.
All right, I'm going to take one more from the web if there are any, and then we'll wrap it up. Mara?
Okay, we have one last question. How could these studies provide a basis for further study of the effect of the Affordable Care Act? Or are there plans in place to do this?
Yeah, I don't think these studies are particularly designed to answer that question. I think that, it depends on kind of how the coverage is going to happen, the subsidies will be rolled out, and, how the benefit packages will be tailored to the needs of people with disabilities. So it'll certainly be something worth studying and tracking over time. As Jeff was just saying, if your benefits are ceased because of medical improvement, but you can go get insurance through an exchange with reasonable continuity, your prospects may be quite different than they are right now. But this all remains to be seen. This stuff won't be rolled out really for another year or so. But it's a good question. Does the commentary have any funding available?
No word on that.
Well, I do think, that having these cohorts that we're tracking, and when there's a major change in policy like ACA, then we could continue comparing the new cohorts to the earlier cohorts, and try to figure out, if any of the changes we're seeing might be attributed to ACA.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us, and there is a comment card in your packets that we'd appreciate if you filled out and tell us how we did today. We look forward to seeing you at the next one.